How many of, by a show of hands, how many of you here have ever operated a firearm? Okay, so about most of you. Do you all know the history behind them? I've, I have always had an interest, a bit of a morbid curiosity, in the things that destroy other things. So naturally, firearms have been a bit of a point of interest to me. So I have followed that both casually a bit and formally for academic purposes. So today we're gonna talk about the timeline of firearms from the definition what a firearm is, then through the most archaic of firearms to blasting caps, and then all the way to the automatic handgun. To start with the definition, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives defines it as any weapon, including a starter gun, that will, can be, or can be converted to fire a projectile by the means of an explosive. Therefore, the medieval Chinese weapons like these that were hollow bamboo tubes would count as a firearm. They began to be made out of metal over time, but they did stay with that design for a good period of time. The first mechanical type of firearm appeared in the 13th century, and that would be the matchlock. The matchlock used either a piece of rope or a burning match to light a pool of powder, which would then light the main charge inside of the barrel and fire the projectile. The next notable mechanism would be the wheel lock. However, sadly, that mechanism was very complicated and expensive to produce, so it was not widely manufactured and so died out. During the reign of the matchlock, a new development to the firearm was created, and that is rifling. Rifling is spiral grooves cut into the barrel of a firearm, which would spin the bullet and cause it to fly straighter. The second mechanism that really caught on came about in about 1630, give or take. It is probably one of the most famous from this era, the flintlock. The flintlock was similar in design to the matchlock. However, instead of a match or wick, used flint striking against the mechanism to create a spark which would light the powder. This was much more convenient than holding a flame in your hands, for obvious reasons. Those reigned for a few hundred years until the start of the Civil War, when, around that time, the blasting cap started to come into production. The blasting cap is a small piece of metal which, when impacted, will create a small explosion. That explosion is capable of lighting powder, so it was implemented in mechanisms similar to the match and flintlock, but those died out not too terribly long after and were replaced by cartridge weapons. cartridges combine a blasting cap, the gunpowder, and the projectile all into one little deadly bundle, and but they were first primarily used rifle-wise in the Spencer repeating carbine. That was most notable for a decently sized internal clip and its rapid fire rate of 30 rounds per minute. The decade of the 1860s was pretty good for firearms, getting the Spencer repeating carbine, the Winchester rifle, and the Gatling gun. That spit out 3,000 rounds per minute, decimating the record set by the Spencer repeating carbine. It would not last very long as one of the only notable automatic weapons, though. That list was added to by the automatic handgun, which came about 20 years later. So we've talked about what exactly a firearm is, what the earliest firearms were, all the way through blasting caps and into the automatic era. So I hope that with this information you will have a greater appreciation for the heritage of the firearms and all of the work and innovation that has come into them.